Rise of the Eco-Guards. Stand on guard with me. The Call to Serve Canada. Part 2. Section J. Computational Determinations. Hello, and welcome back to the Rise of the Eco-Guards Stand on Guard with Me series of works entitled The Call to Serve Canada. This video series is brought to you by GEMCO, Incorporated, 1990, the parent entity responsible for its other not-for-profit divisions, encompassing those known as the Eco-Guards organizations, which all include Eco-Guards, IES, an acronym which stands for Innovative Eco Solutions, GEMCO Deep, with its other acronym known as Digital Eco Educational Productions, and Eco Tech Arts, as well as the Young Eco Rangers, as we proceed with the blessing of Asgardian Ministries. With our educational, informative, investigative, conceptual, artistic, well-thought-out designs and deterministic videos in this 10-part series. In the last video sequences of The Call to Serve Canada Part 2, I expressed many of the things that I had begun to achieve after attaining my better educations, as I was also working on attaining my degrees in microcomputer electronics engineering and computer sciences, as well as serving in so many more other great NPOs. But also serving for many years as the primary leader of New Brunswick's largest multifaceted eco-based organization, as we led the way with several of our first great endeavors as plastics toy repair, refurbishing, and reclamations experts. But also referring to a time when we helped force down those riverside landfills with our unique activist manners of conducting public promotionals, and so much more. Or should I say, help to have the Petitcodiac Riverside city dumps finally permanently shut down or closed, as well as those other eco-based initiatives. Nevertheless, we failed to have the federal, provincial, and municipal governments properly quarantine those truly devastated toxic sites. And that, in and of itself, is all explained in our prior video entitled The Call to Serve Canada, Part 2, Section B, Altered Attributes. Anyways, I'll now continue where I left off in that last video of this series. Eventually, the Eco-Guards ended up having to transition into another field of expertise after the need for used and refurbished plastic toys became less sought after during those times by those many organizations that we had previously helped. And thankfully, because of all the many past personal endeavors that I had pushed to work through, while also doing all those other Eco-Guards goals that were previously mentioned in those other videos in this series, the Eco-Guards could transition into a field that could also do so many more good eco-based works, still including, but also later finding a better manner of dealing with all waste plastics, and so much more. Let me explain the other matters and things that had taken place during those years from 1986 to 1998, just before that newer transition took place, and then after from 1999 to 2015. For by the end of 1989, I had fully completed my education as a qualified microcomputer electronics engineer and computer scientist, with some of the highest marks in my class, at least according to several of my professors, and received my diploma. In that year, I would also need to attain my certificates, or blocks, as they are known in many fields. And that could only occur after gaining my apprenticeship with some company willing to take me on. For the New Brunswick government had automatically sent me their requirements and their paperwork that would need to be filled in, after they were notified of my marks and diploma status by that internationally recognized learning institute. But that any potential employer, master, or whatever you would call them, that I would finish my learning and other necessities under, would need in order to attain my certification. For many months, I would apply over and over again at all the computer and electronic shops in Moncton, only to be rejected again and again, all because I had no hands-on experience, at least according to them. When I was actually delving into such complex sciences and prototype creations, it would have truly blown their minds. Eventually, one company did grant me a somewhat menial position within their organization, which would start my apprenticeship. But that was short-lived. After 3 months, that company filed for bankruptcy and shuttered their doors. Anyways, prior to that presumed short-lived start to my career in 1990, While still conducting all the other things that I was involved with, I had attained other employment in 1986 to 1987 working in another industry, if you want to call it that. And I'm bringing this up now for several other interesting reasons. Bear with me. You'll understand why soon. That employment was as an artistic shaper of Canadian coal and maple statuettes, or so they called it, but really, it was all a con job. 4 of those statues were made with a type of bleached or very white quick-drying Portland cement and plaster of Paris mixture called hydrocal, and with the addition of less than 5% coal or maple wood dust. And that company sold great amounts of those Canadian-made multi-shaped animal statuettes in places like Disneyland, Disney World, and many other tourist attractions. Nevertheless, I knew I would need to do anything legitimate to make money, to live and continue with our eco-based efforts. And believe it or not, the business was considered legit, even though those shapes were made from rubberized casting from other companies' artistic works, such as toys, statues, and many other sources of shapes, and not truly made with coal or maple wood. But I would also need to simultaneously continue with our other eco-based efforts. As I continued to gain funds through those employments, 4 of those were just parts of the manners in conducting all our efforts during those early days of the Eco Guards organization. And it was interesting that this very business just happened to be part of the adjacent former Swift Meat packaging plant on the Albert Street extension, and it was right next door to the Petitcodiac Riverside City dumps that I had been closely monitoring since an early age of 6 years old, for it was still a very active grade polluting source. So I had the opportunity to continue to witness all the continuing devastating effects going on right next door. But devastations were much closer than that, and I would learn several great lessons during those times, including to never trust the New Brunswick workers' compensation system, for they were working with many employers to suppress any injured workers' claims. Anyways, I'm jumping ahead here, for I would take about 20% of my employment funds in order to continue with our eco-based projects. Over the course of that employment, I would get injured on that job, all because that already tight preventative masking and filtering system failed to properly seal around my face. And one day, that cement dust caused me to pass out while at work after about a year of being employed for Triple L Enterprises. Suffice to say, days later, after some medical leave, the owner of that enterprise would convince me not to take out a workers' compensations claim, even though someone in that enterprise had already filed the required accident report that the Workers' Compensations Commission, or WCB, insisted upon. For the owner of that enterprise would place me within other areas of that business. At least for a little while, about 3 months later, he laid me off, claiming that there was no more work for me to do. But also understand this, that workers' compensation system, where their agents never did any follow-ups or even showed any interest in what truly happened. And that would be my first time that I would attempt to unsuccessfully gain access to my unemployment insurance stamps. For I had accumulated over a year and a half of those, which should have allowed me to gain those needed funds, for the UI required 52 weeks of full-time work in order to qualify for coverage. But the unemployment office still refused to grant that claim. Unfortunately, this would be the second time they would do this. But understand the system was different back then, and it should have been granted, for I did have enough stamps. For I was still suffering with breathing difficulties at that time, all because of the hydrocal, another fancy name for pure white quick-drying Portland cement, that the company was using to make their fake coal and maple statuettes. Just prior to being laid off, I recall showing Mr. Joe Landry, the owner of that business, how he could create a different type of more effective and complete masking system for his employees, and his company could be one of the first to have it, designed to not only protect the human respiratory tract, but also the entire human caput, ears, eyes, cranium, just the whole thing, where all his employees could be helped to breathe with a pressurized clean air system, and would truly be a product that he could exploit for future great revenues. But he did not want to listen and dismissed that truly unique masking system, and that was in the mid-1980s. Later, I would continue to expand upon that masking system and eventually incorporated several versions into the Eco Guards percussion armors, but mostly as clean air ventilation and cooling systems. Nevertheless, those evolutions of those masking systems continued for a great many more years, and would be noted in many of the past series of videos herein. Talking about incorporated in 1990, after some careful considerations concerning a great many of my inventions, and also as it relates to the eco-guards, and after approaching the Atlantic Opportunities Agency, a new government-funded agency designed to help entrepreneurs in the Atlantic provinces, I approached them about helping us in the creation of a manufacturing facility for the conditioned sleeper, a new and innovative type of pressurized bladder sleeping system with many overall health benefits and other innovations incorporated within its overall structure, while also allowing the person to choose the pressure rating for a better comfort sleeping area. For it could also help keep you cool during the summer months and warm during the winter. Anyhow, to make a long story much shorter, they agreed that they would work with us, but they wanted me to incorporate an entity that could create divisions within itself. For I was also in talks with them concerning a great many other innovative creations that I had diligently worked on for many years. That year, we created the entity of GEMCO Incorporated, which was an acronym for just Eco Management Concerns Overall. Although many people believed it was based on my name, for the initials are the same. Suffice to say, after we were incorporated, ACOA refused to further help in any manner. And there's another long story that goes with this as well. I'm just not getting into it right now. So we were left to attempt to deal with all of these greatly thought out conceptual designs, and a great many were then taken and sent to several other organizations that claimed they could help. Again, to make a long story much shorter, in those days, we would lose a lot of our designs to unscrupulous American companies that I believe were all set up just to do those types of things. For they understood international intellectual property rights better than most. And believe it or not, those invention centers still exist. During these times, I found it really difficult to get into these industries, including what I had attained my education for. However, I would not give up, and luck would have it that a friend of mine, whom just so happened to have once been a client at Christian Home Centers, was working with computers almost every day. And he was getting access to many of those from an unsuspecting source. For he was getting many of his parts from dumpster diving at the very places I had previously tried to gain employment and my certifications. After speaking with my friend Clarence Cormier about my need to gain much hands-on experience and also watching him work diligently on many systems that for the most part were being thrown out at those places, he and I started working together toward some very interesting goals. And over several years, I learned more in my spare time than I would have from any apprenticeship with some company willing to take me on. Eventually, we both seen a great need for not only keeping these electronics from ending up in the landfills, but also the fact that a great many children were not really learning about computers in school yet. By that time, both of us were fathers, and we had some concern about that fact, and we truly believed our efforts would change all that. Nevertheless, that would start to change by the time the eco-guards were starting to transition into an electronics refurbishing and recycling organization in 1998 after working with plastic and even some electronic toys that we needed to refurbish. Another type of division of GEMCO Incorporated, known as Eco Tech Cards, whom also built and gave away computer learning systems to many less fortunate children between 1998 to 2014. Well before 2015, when the NB government finally brought in another company or organization to take over that presumed eco-stewardship necessity after not even supporting our efforts for all those years. For New Brunswick was the last province in all of Canada to finally get on board with those types of factual endeavors. But GO's NB government endeavors only dealt with the electronic waste, not really helping all of our society's children. And after our own monitoring of their efforts, we can truly say this. They failed to accomplish those goals with any real manners of keeping those electronics from our waste streams. For even years later, electronics are still making their ways into those landfills. I have video proof of those facts. If they would have truly listened to us all those many years ago, I'm sure things would have turned out better, for we actually asked for their help with our desire to increase our abilities in 2012, but also in helping me to continue with any job, and I'll get into those reasons soon. And this was all attempted through their environmental trust fund or grant system that should have helped. And as they also finally began to also support our two provincial education systems better with bridging the digital divide. Now, going back to 1999, in that year, because of our efforts in bridging the digital divide, and also because I had approached a lot of the computer companies in the greater Moncton area about our futurist, humanistic, educational, and eco-based goals. A great many of these shops would hold their electronic waste for us, so that we may repair those for our goals, but not all came on board, for they could not be bothered. While also learning and gaining very much in the way of hands-on experiences, for we were actually able to repair a great many of these computer parts. For those companies and their techs, if you want to call them that, are all plug-and-play experts. They don't really fix anything electronic, they just swap out plug-and-play parts for new versions. And it just so happened that one of those electronic shops, but also a place considered as the largest pawn shop east of Montreal, entitled The Parlor, a division of Whiteacre Electronics, had created their own internal division known as Parlor Computers, owned by a former Moncton-based Radio Shack franchise owner. And they needed another tech and salesperson. And after being approached by that computer shop's manager during one of my many pickups of defective computer parts, I was offered a job at that place. And that was mostly because Danny knew that I really have a better comprehension of computers than most people that they had attempted to work with. For every time they hired someone to fill that position, it never worked out, and they would either leave within a month or get fired within that short time frame. Mostly due to the fact that they claimed to have experience when they really had none. Anyways, days later, Ron Whitaker and Danny Dupuis and I sat down and had a meeting, and after that, I agreed to come on board and get to work making this one of the greatest computer experiences for all of Moncton citizens. Long story short, I worked with that great team of people for well over 7 years, as we brought that then struggling portion of that company into the greatest place to buy, repair, and learn about computers, and never taking advantage of any customers. And treating all with great respect for great service was the key to success. As time went on, Ron and Danny still continued to support my other eco-based efforts within the Eco Guards organizations. But I still think Ron missed out on a great opportunity, for I kept telling him to promote that environmental fact concerning buying used opposed to new. For refurbished goods are many times better than new, for they have been broken in and function sometimes better. And by the time I left, the Parlor Computers was considered by the people of Moncton and even the professors across the street at the New Brunswick Community College as the premier computer shop in all of Moncton. Even Future Shop, right around the corner, used to send people to see us for some of their repairs. In fact, I remember one day being told by two of those New Brunswick Community College professors, after they came over seeking an answer to their questions that was stumping their entire class, them included, and after quickly giving them the answer, they said that I should be teaching their class about computers, for they were teaching their students to be certified A+ techs, and they truly believed that I had a great deal of knowledge that should be shared. But I also recall helping the RCMP one day, after some converse concerning one of their child exploitation cases, and cracking that wide open for them, for they had an altered image of a person of interest that they showed me, and I told them how to untwist that image, and what program had been used to originally alter it. Told them how to reverse the emphasis, and after they did, weeks later, I was approached by the same officer and told that I should apply for a job with the RCMP Child Exploitation Division. I declined, for if I had to witness such things every day, I would be so heartbroken I could possibly turn vigilante. Nevertheless, he told me about how they caught the guy and how my information and guidance had helped them crack that international case. Although I was thankful that I could help them, I could truly not see myself doing that type of heartbreaking work. And really I pray for all those people that need to conduct those types of careers. And everyone should pray for all of them as well. Anyways, I would leave that employment in 2006 and sought to work in an area that I could do just as much good, but with a higher pay, but with less stress. For I was not just doing tech and sales work while at Whiteacre Electronics, but so many more jobs within that place, that I was getting burnt out. And I knew that feeling for many years before while at Christian home centers. But there's so much more to it than just that. But I think I've already covered enough of that. Point being, I think I attained my apprenticeship and beyond, even though now the government of NB does not require any of that. For all the techs in that industry are certified A+ only. Sadly, years later, Mr. Danny Dupuy passed away while still working at the Parlor Computers, and later so did its wonderful owner Mr. Ron Whitaker, two people I still consider dear friends, whom both gave me a chance to prove my skill sets. I only wish I would have told them both how much it truly changed me and made me a better person, and how much it truly meant to me. So at that time in 2006, I moved on to a call center job with better pay and less stress at the American division of AOL, and after going and taking the initial employment test that I aced in less time and with a greater degree of accuracy than anyone else, at least according to their hiring agent. And after going through their training, I went to work taking calls. After about 2 weeks, I was asked if I could start helping the other 300 or so employees while on the call floor as a point of contact agent. So I did, and all was going very, very well until about a year later, when the parent company, Time Warner, headquartered in the States, decided that they could not justify paying Canadian agents more than their American agents. For at that time, our Canadian dollar was slightly above the American dollar, but I believe there was truly more to it. For the previous NB Frank McKenna Liberal government gave AOL a $50 million grant to set up in Moncton 6 years earlier, and that money had run out. So AOL would close their doors in this community. But prior to that employment with AOL, my first choice was with another company. They just indicated back then, because I had no call center experience, they would not hire me. Nevertheless, after I had learned that this was going to take place at AOL, I would go back and sought a career with Rogers Communications, one of Canada's largest telecommunications companies. For I was looking for a long-term career that I would truly enjoy. After several weeks, I was hired on their team as a wireless technical support consultant, or what really is a cell phone technical support agent. And after my training was over, I went on the call floor as a fully trained agent. At that time, I could not believe my luck, for I had just entered what I believed was a great fit for my past educations and hands-on experiences, which also included my services-based fields of expertise. And everything from salary to their benefits package was something I had never experienced before. And another strange occurrence just happened to take place, for one of my former teammates at the Parlor Computers just happened to be working there, but in a different division, as well as my older sister was working downstairs in another division, as well as one of the Eco Guards founder sisters was also there. It truly felt like a great big family. But many from AOL also were hired over time. I recall gaining a great kudos from upper management and even the head office in Ontario when Mr. Ted Rogers was still alive. After being one of the only 7 people to show up for work one day during what some believed was a major snowstorm that was hitting all of Eastern Canada, including Ontario. So to say that Rogers Communication had few staff taking calls that day is not an understatement. But to me, that storm was not really that bad. Anyways, my enthusiasm for that career would not diminish because of a little snow. But over time, it did diminish for greater reasons, but not really linked to doing that career, but the politics of major federally regulated national employers that only see their employees as a number, not a person that can experience negative influences from unforeseen difficulties while under contract with that employer. But those occurrences happened after Mr. Ted Rogers had passed away. For truthfully, I believe if he would have been alive, he would never have allowed the things that transpire to have occurred. Sadly, after 4 months into this career, I was injured on the job. Can you imagine that, working at a call center and getting injured in a major way? But understand this, it does happen, it's just a freak happenstance, and that would start a great battle between many parties that I never imagined would have ever needed to take place, especially in Canada. For I only wanted to keep working, and the disability that the workplace accident caused should have only pushed them to accommodate those physical needs. It would come up during those times, after they prematurely closed my claim, when WorkSafe NB would attempt to say that I didn't want to work. And I would keep citing my call qualities, as well as the fact that I sought that job, when AOL let everyone go, and if I didn't want to work, I could have taken my employment insurance for a little over a year, and then went out to look for another job. And in hindsight, maybe I should have. Then I would not have gotten hurt with a life-changing injury and a second rehab injury. For several years, I would attempt to get back to work and went through 2 work hardening and return to work processes, as both constantly failed. All because I could not sit or stand for very long without experiencing major pain in my spinal area, legs, arms, and hands, and even affected my cognitive abilities at times. And those would not subside regardless of all the medical interventions and treatments. Only to find out years later that I had been injured during my second work hardening and RTW program. Nevertheless, it did not help that the workers' compensation case manager and the Southeastern Regional Director had devised a plan or conspired to prematurely and permanently close my claim on May 31st, 2010. I believe this. There's a whole lot of proof concerning all of this, as well as more to this story, that I'll get into in another upcoming series. Watch for it in the future if the current NB government of 2025 does not finally and properly deal with this soon. It will be entitled Rise of the Eco Guards, Stand on Guard with Me, Part 4, Work Safe or Die. All these factors would also contribute to my inabilities to further work towards the Eco Guards goals. But I would still not give up. And because no employers would now consider hiring me, regardless of my education and practical experiences, all because of the absence from work, these constant recurrences did and would further cause. I attempted to create my own full-time, limitedly paid employment within the Eco Guards Innovative Eco Solutions Division, only to be further hindered by those government types that will not support the very eco-based things that they claim to be supporting. Anyways, in September 2010, after being sent home by Roger Communications for the last great recurrence I experienced while working for them in mid-August 2010, I filed a Canadian human rights complaint in 2011 because they would not allow me to work with these disabilities, and in 2012 after being wrongfully terminated by them for my career. The CHRC found that the evidence suggested that I had been terminated from my employment due to my disability. But yet nothing was done to rectify the situation or penalize the employer. And to this day, the workers' compensation system refuses to cover any employment earnings losses and so much more. All because of their privately paid doctors manufactured biased plagiarized fictional tales from the 4 limited interviews from very early 2010. Regardless of all the truly objective medical scans that proves the extent of the injuries in both cases. Anyhow, that would eventually drive me into serving in 2014 as Moncton Center's NB Green Party candidate, but unsuccessfully did not gain the employment and the seat I sought in order to democratically represent my constituents, partly due to a heart attack that I was suffering with for over 3 weeks prior to Election Day on September 22nd, 2014, which caused my inability to properly campaign during those last few weeks. For I was in the hospital for about 6 days leading up to Election Day, but I still wanted to serve, as I still do. That said, I would like to take this opportunity to indicate this fact. During those 3 weeks in very late August to mid to late September 2014, the only symptoms that I recall having was beyond extreme mid to upper back pain, and because of a previous stupid workplace injury at a Rogers call center, of all places, which occurred to my whole spinal area, I only wrongfully assumed that I was experiencing further ongoing recurrences of those conditions. And the reason I'm stating this in this video is to possibly help anyone else that may be experiencing similar physical conditions. In other words, if you're having severe to excessive back pain that's increasing in intensity, go to our great hospitals, for they can make that determination really fast. For I had no other symptoms of a heart attack, only severe back pain. Anyways, I will say, I was fortunate, for after being helped by many great medical physicians and nurses at the George Duman Hospital in Moncton, and then also with the help of even more professional medical staff and great physicians in St. John NB, where I underwent an operation, I was able to continue with my life in purposeful causes. Nevertheless, I still currently limitedly conduct my unpaid chief executive officer's duties for Gemco Incorporated, as I had prior to that workplace accident and wrongful termination of employment due to those disabilities and all its other not-for-profit divisions, such as the Eco Guards, Eco Rangers, Eco Tech Guards, as well as so many other duties in the creations of true Canadian creative multimedia content through Gemco Deep. Plus, I still create and promote a great many other inventions, and so on. Although it's not easy, after I experienced a work-related injury in early 2008 and another rehab injury in 2010 that also caused several permanent physical disabilities. Oh, there's so much more to that story and the facts that surround that, and the manners in which many of our government agencies negatively conduct their affairs concerning my disabilities and their false misleading medical plagiaristic reportings that further cause greater issues. For they really have done nothing to help me in any form. Anyways, keep watching my other video series and you'll find out some other interesting developments. But for now, here's the place where you can read all about that, if you're interested. Just remember the rise of the Eco Guards Facebook group page and work safe or die. And to be very blunt, I've lived a difficult life, partly due to my own making, but primarily in my youth, mostly because I was a rebellious teenager who would not listen to his parent. But I also seen and experienced many negative things, and still do. But I still remain optimistic and create many eco-based inventions, conceptual and industrial designs, and theoretical posits that have been adopted, used, and sold by many international corporations, even though they don't pay or give recognition for such to me or even the Eco Guards. In fact, your home probably has one of those currently in there now, like a smart smoke detector with a reset timer or hush button, thereby preventing the need to remove the battery or even removing that smoke detector from its mounting in the event that it's set off by accident, like when you burn toast. Nevertheless, I can still prove all of what's being stated herein, and so much more, like all the creative arts from my registered copyright and trademarked intellectual properties that have been taken, ripped apart for many of their illustrated conceptual designs and speculative fiction artistic literary works found therein. Because I attempted to previously collaborate with many other production companies in Canada, United States, and Great Britain, going back as far as the early 1980s, where they would then place into other successful IPs, such as some of the many Star Trek franchises, and so many more, actually going back decades. Again, without proper permissions and recognitions. That said, those actions are destructive toward the true advancements of my several other careers and justified eco-based causes, but more importantly, my family's well-being and lifestyle. Although, I will say, it's still exciting to at least see some of my works being used by mainstream production companies, but it would have still been nice to get the credit for my works, even though they wrote and redesigned around much of it. But it's still clearly my work. Unfortunately, their actions do still make it very destructive to my future plans for the overall intellectual properties that I'm still working towards completing, such as the BIOS Wars universe of 30 speculative investigative fiction series, which are told through the eyes of an adolescent artificial intelligence, and are perspective collages of chroniclings. And these digital video series have been partly released on my BIOS Wars, Rumble, and YouTube channels earlier this year. Keep watching for more of them, for they are truly creative Canadian content, but still limited by my skill sets, lack of funding, and yes, even those physical disabilities that cause many other issues in the pursuits of all my works and dreams. Now, think about this after hearing the true stories you've witnessed in this series. Consider this: I've never witnessed anything quite so destructive towards our peoples, our nations, and to our democracies, let alone our ecosystems, whether ecological or in the fields of economics, as I have in the last 10 years while under this current federal government. For their actions have also taken a great toll on all those other eco-based efforts of all those not-for-profit organizations I'm involved with. And believe this, those organizations have never had it easy. It has always been a great struggle to financially attain any funds for our worthwhile works and endeavors, but also to be some of the only real eco-based groups that truly teach the realisms of what's happening on this planet as we work towards our balanced eco approaches towards the individual person's betterments, but also the collective eco-based natures for humanity and our country. And also understand, since I feel this way about these current conditions in our country, this should also say a lot about what my fellow Canadians are feeling and enduring. Now, with all that's going on in the political arena, and the fact that it's been internally indicated by many within that parliamentary and SI COP committee and elsewhere, that we currently have individuals that have been elected into our parliamentary houses that are complicit with foreign entities to push their foreign and corporate agendas upon the Canadian peoples without our permissions, while also contributing and compromising our voting and electoral systems and our ways of life, but also our limited form of democracy in this once very beloved country, is actually an act of treason, but also borders upon the sovereignties and destructions of many other nations as well. And believe this, we cannot look away or turn a blind eye any longer, nor should we trust any of them to find, make, or correct these types of actions. While they sit in our parliament and legislative houses, it's up to law enforcement and our legal systems to do that. Nevertheless, it's also up to us to force these issues and to attain the correct course of actions. In other words, don't run from our country because you don't like what's going on. Stand on guard with me and make your voice heard while we fight the good fight for our better tomorrows. And those manners of pulling these efforts off will be addressed in several upcoming videos of many new video series, as well as elsewhere within our legal means, but only with every caring Canadian support in whatever manner they can achieve. Also understand that even some of those law-enforcing individuals may be complicit with these imps, so to be vigilant is not only a must, but a necessity. Nevertheless, we must act in a manner that allows our laws and those honorable peoples that stand for those to do their investigations and their jobs without directly interfering with what needs to be done. That said, even after some of my own long-duration investigations on these types of matters, I believe that those law enforcement agencies choose not to act until those individuals are either elected out of office or until an election is called. But we also must insist that Elections Canada also use those laws to enforce what used to be some of the highest standards in proper, safe, and accurate voting practices. However, the sad reality is that it may be too late for that, for the last election this year has shown some concerning traits that should never have shown up. Now, also comprehend, many of these politicians, but not all, are complicit and worse, for they push upon their constituents and this country's peoples into very negative money-making and mass control agendas created by old four groups of men and women that really don't have any of our best interests at heart, only the control and power they seek. For it's all within the ancient beast systems previously foretold within the many scriptures that have been pushing them into greater and greater power struggles that none of them will ever win. For a house divided can't stand. For there are many that truly want to serve our once great country. Nevertheless, some of those politicians conduct these types of actions so that they may enrich themselves, whether by attaining better employments after their tenures as MLAs or MPs in our parliamentary or legislative houses. And believe this, that fact is truly not difficult to see and to attain the evidence to prove. For many of them move on within corporations' hierarchies after leaving politics. And truthfully, I'm starting to think and see many truths that corporations are really the real power and governance structure that are running everything, while they continue in pushing a global agenda dedicated to forcing upon free-thinking and freedom-loving individuals a bullshit climate change green cash agenda, or central banking digital identifications and their Green New Deal. You know, part of the fourth industrial revolution of that Great Reset agenda, which would actually control the masses beyond that of which everyone experiences anyways. For everyone is a slave to that system regardless of stature, wealth, bond, or unbonded. In other words, whether rich or poor, free or slave, we're all under some control of several ancient beast systems, its images, and its limited power over the census of peoples and the numbering of humanity that it's given to every individual upon Earth. You know, it's linked to your government-controlled social security number. It's actually quite funny. Canada is the only country on Earth that calls it what it is, a SIN number. But this is where it gets even more interesting. For many of these politicians and some of their family members also invest heavily into some of those stocks that are pumped up by billions of Canadian taxpayer dollars, such as all those four battery manufacturing plants and mining operations upon Canadian soil that have been recently announced and heavily backed with great sums of our taxpayer dollars by this current Liberal government. These types of political actions and insider trading not only turns my stomach, but also angers me greatly, but also makes me very concerned for our country and people's future. For it appears to be the crime of the century, and I'll explain. In the next two extensive video series of works in the rise of the eco-guards, Stand on Guard with Me, Part 3. Moving on, grievances in Part 4, Work Safe or Die. Anyways, this concludes this Part 2 series of videos in the call to serve Canada. Hopefully, you'll join with me later on, once I take some time off to reflect upon matters that need to be analyzed and properly determined before proceeding with my future works. Until then, stay safe out there and continue working at keeping the equality that Canada's freedoms and our sovereignty as a complete country within our North American continent has always been intended to be. But also remember to keep it clean.